Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We got a real special show coming for you today. I'm joined by Ryan. I'll introduce him in just a moment. Let's get into what we are going to be covering, and that is founder-led sales. We're doing a Revenue Accelerator Masterclass Part 2. Last time we did a primer, part 1, as you would expect. We talked about founder-led sales. We'll do a review in just a moment, but I wanted to encourage everybody who is watching, who's joining us. We are going to go through these topics today. So how to approach founder-led sales. How do I start selling from scratch? How do I run my first sales call? How do I close a deal without feeling pushy? What's the best way to handle rejection? I want to remind everyone, you can always use the Q&A box if the questions come up, or use the chat to ask us questions. Feel free to derail us, challenge us, throw down the gauntlet. Ask us anything that you want. We want to prioritize your questions, especially if you spend time making it here. And if you're watching this on the YouTubes, on social media, make sure, like, comment, subscribe. It's always extremely helpful. Ryan, you are the Chief Marketing Officer, one of the founding members here at Startups.com. Give us a quick thumbnail background of what you have done in terms of marketing, and especially when it comes to founder-led sales.
Oh man, I've been making all the mistakes for 25 plus years so that I can share those stories and not everybody else has to repeat them.
That's good.
And they keep changing, which is good. So I go back and I make sure that I can routinely make them over and over and over again. We've spent a lot of time on this stuff. And I think one of the super fun things that we get to do is not only am I the Chief Marketing Officer here, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer fly on the wall to thousands of startups every year. And so we get to see what's working, what's not, both internally and externally at scale.
That's fantastic. And when you are working with founders, what do you normally see in terms of their challenges when it comes to founder-led sales?
Oof, the challenges are myriad. It depends so much on context of the startup. I guess there's a few mistakes that we see that are pretty routine. Talking too much, listening too little, right? It's not a pitch. We call it a sales pitch. It's not. It's a conversation, especially when it's founder-led sales and especially early on, right? At some point, sure, it becomes a pitch. Founder-led sales is not a pitch. It's a conversation. Trying to scale too fast. We talked about this in the last one. If you don't yet know why people buy, you cannot start to multiply that effort yet, right? So should I hire a salesperson? Right? Probably not yet. Do you know how to sell it yet? Are you routinely selling it? Are you closing most of the people you feel like should close? If the answer is no, you're trying to scale too fast. Selling features, this is a big one for founders. This is such a big one for founders because we get so excited about our product. Right? We love it. We spent all this time building it, thinking through it, making it into all the things that it could be. That's not what people are buying, right? We're not selling features. We are solving problems. They don't care what it does. They care what it fixes, right? And so I think that's another huge mistake that founders make.
Another thing that gets brought up a lot is just not even starting with sales in the first place. There's a lot of build it, and I'm positive Kevin Costner told me in his movie, or I watched it, and they will come. And that's the reason the last time we covered these topics, just to get all our founders understanding, this is where we start. And we talked about these. We said, why founder-led sales? What's the real job of sales at the beginning? What if I'm not a salesperson? This is very common. How is FLS different from traditional sales? What are the biggest mistakes founders make when it comes to founder-led sales? Ryan, these are collected from your experience after talking to hundreds, literally hundreds of founders experiencing the same challenges. Give us a quick rundown, just so that the founders here watching this don't have to run back and watch the whole other first class. Give us a quick 5-minute synopsis of what they would have learned when going through that first class.
Sure. I mean, if we go back to some of these like super principles, right? It's things like, it's not about generating revenue, right? It's about validating that customers actually want this early on with founder-led sales. And that's something that only we as the founders can do because we have so much more flexibility. So this is the real job of sales at the beginning, is to help us validate the solution, validate our approach, because we're always going to be the closest to the product, right? And the customer and the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. So it's so important that we keep that kind of front and center. This what if I'm not a salesperson? You don't need to be, right? This isn't sales in that same traditional sense, right? You're not selling, you are solving problems, right? You are digging in with people. I think I said this on the last segment, but I didn't have my handy dandy visual aid. The mom test book, right? This is customer interviews with a cash register at the end. That's what we're doing, right? So we are asking questions, we are digging in, we are finding problems, and we are understanding them. Right? That's what's super important there. Why is it different? Because you're not just pushing product. You're building relationships, you're testing messaging, and you are this is super important. You're shaping the solution in real time, okay? That's something a salesperson, if you hire somebody, the last thing you want them to do is to shape the solution in real time. They can come back with some feedback, but they can't do it on the fly like a founder does. Because if they do, if salespeople start shaping the solution in real time, what's this called? What do we call this?
Pitch slapping?
No, that's when we just go in and, no, wide sales. Wide sales. Pitch slapping is another problem, but it's wide sales. It's like, oh, sure, we can do that, or we could do this, or there's some room for stretching and pushing and making the product better. But if a sales team does too much of that, we can go off the rails really quickly.
Right on. Well, if you're in the audience, once again, remember, ask your questions. We want to help you out. And we just want to make sure that we contextualize this. So if you're out there and you're like, hey, I could really use help specifically in XYZ, then we're going to customize everything that we say. So we'll just make sure. And that's just because you're here and we want to take care of you. Now, Ryan, we're going to be setting up for this. We're going to say, this is the approach for founder-led sales. And I hate to ask a real basic question, but I don't want to make any assumptions. Why is an approach so important? Like, why do we have to think about how we're going to approach founder-led sales instead of just, let's just go do it?
Like most things, founder-led sales are going to be one of a couple hundred things we're doing at any given time, right, as a founder. If you don't have an approach, the chances that you're going to learn much from this or the chances that you're going to improve are going to be low. Let me also say this. If it's a difference between having an approach and not starting at all, go ahead and start, right? I'd rather you start slinging the sales and trying it. That's not usually the problem. The problem that I generally see is that founders work way too hard on the approach. They make the approach way more complicated than it needs to be. We keep rethinking, well, we're going to attend another sales seminar. I'm just going to watch, 500 more sales videos. We're going to recraft the pitch only internally 7 more times. This is a problem too. All right. So we want to be balanced in this effort. We want to be measured in this approach of building our approach. It is super, super important. But this isn't an optional activity, right? And so knowing that we have to engage in it, like anything else, we should have a bit of a plan around what we're going to do so that we know when things start working, we can do more of them. And if things aren't working well, we can modify them. If you're just kind of winging it each and every time, the chances that you're going to dial into something that actually works significantly lower.
So you're saying just like startups, anything to do with startups, speed, execution is going to be important. But at the same time, don't overthink it. And that's the whole reason you created this list. Because, I got a little preview of really taking the pressure off. That's what I like about what you did, Ryan, is you really taking the pressure off of us, that we don't have to go and take one of those Dale Carnegie, Hopkins universities or whatever course. I forget what, I know like people who actually went down to Las Vegas and took this long, week-long seminar. You don't have to do that. And so
nothing that involves the word black belt is required here, Ed.
That's very comforting, especially I could make a whole bunch of Asian jokes, but I'm not going to right now, just for all of you out there.
Leave that to you, friend. That's firmly in your camp, sir.
Let's take a look at this. So how to approach founder-led sales. So here's the first one. We're going to rip through these and then hopefully be open for some questions. I've got lots of questions for you, Ryan. The first one is, how do I start selling from scratch? Sure. This is great. Ground zero, give it to us.
Yeah, look, let's break this down. Make it, again, really simple. I think I said this already, but this is not an optional activity, right? We have to do this. So starting is key, all right? So how do I start selling? You start selling by starting selling, right? Too often we just see people drag their feet and they're like, well, I don't feel ready for this. We see the same thing with engineers and product. Like, well, it's just not quite ready for the world yet. It's ready. It's ready. It's never going to get better until it sees the world. So let's do a couple things. Let's start with our warm network, right? Most of us built a startup that came from somewhere, some experience, some context that we had. Often cases, it's a previous career. Sometimes it's not, and that's okay too. But if it is, and you had a career in X field, leverage that network. So often I don't see founders do this, and it's because they're like, well, I don't want to show this off. I'd rather this be further along before I let any of the people I know really well see this. Oh my God. Like, please know, they are going to be the best audience. They are going to be the kindest in most times. And who cares if they're not, right? That you need to get this out to your network first. It's going to move faster. So before you start thinking about things like cold outreach or ads or funnels, tap into the people who you already know and who you trust and who trust you, right? As friends, former colleagues, former coworkers, LinkedIn connections, anybody that you think is going to give or get value to what you're building, start having those conversations with, right? And remember, this isn't a straight up sales pitch. You're like, well, but that's not the person who's going to buy this thing necessarily. That's okay. Are they tangentially connected to it? Are they experientially connected to it? Because if they are, talking to them is still going to be helpful.
But let's break this down again. It seems like an obvious question, but we all know lots of people, but
Yeah,
I
we do.
find that when founders, I ask them, like, start with your quote warm network, they still freeze. So, what is it? You sit down with a pen and a piece of paper or go through your phone, write everybody down? Like, let's just get really explicit and granular with like tactical implementation.
Here's a fun exercise actually that I have people do. Go through your address book, go through your phone, right? At least go through the last like 200 people you've texted, okay? Put them into a spreadsheet. Now, this is where people get it wrong. They start thinking, who should I reach out to? And they never get enough evidence behind the who they should reach out to that they find anybody. They come up with like one or two. Well, I know this one person. I know that one person's got the right job title. Instead, what I have them do, 2-column approach, name or whatever contact, identifier, right? Whatever you want to use. I don't care. Phone number, name, whatever you want to use. That's the person. The other column, give me a reason why you wouldn't talk to this person.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Why would you not talk to this? Because then what we do, the second part of this fun game is then I invalidate most of the reasons why they wouldn't talk to the person. I go down and go like, nope, you actually don't need to worry about this. You don't need to worry about that. Because what they're looking for is like, they're hunting a unicorn who's going to just so perfectly fit that they're sure they're going to sell this product to the first time. Get that. It's not going to happen. So instead, build me a big list of the people you know. Export your LinkedIn contacts, do whatever. Start with some context if you want, or not. I actually don't care because all we want to do here is go from 0 to 1 and get some sales momentum. And sales momentum in this case isn't even the sales. It's picking up the phone, it's getting on the Zoom, it's sending the email, it's doing something that's taking a step forward. So it's an exercise that I love, which is tell me why you wouldn't approach this person, because most of the reasons aren't going to be valid.
Yeah, that's actually a really good exercise. I never thought about that. Okay, so you start off with your warm network.
Yep.
People you know, we're starting from scratch. So then what's the step after that? Like, what do you do?
Then you move fast. Move fast. This is where then they'll come up with this list. We'll come up with all the reasons why we shouldn't talk to somebody. We'll invalidate those. And then we're back to well, now I'm going to need to craft my outreach, right? 2 months later, and like still trying to figure out if this should be a semicolon or a comma here, right? So cut that crap out. Just start selling. Your first 10 sales calls should happen this week, not next month. Early conversations have so much impact over how you shape your pitch, what resonates, what doesn't, even if they're not the right audience. Just by virtue, Ed, of saying stuff out loud, you're going to change your pitch.
Yep.
Just hearing yourself say stuff, you're like, ooh, that didn't sound good. Or, hey, here's what sounded great on paper, but every time I try to deliver it, I trip over myself. I'm literally fumbling around, or the transition between this part and that part is awful. I can determine if the transition between two parts is either difficult or bad, selling it to my 7-year-old, right? He's not a buyer, and he won't even give me any feedback, but I alone, just by virtue of delivering it out loud, will start to do this. Now, could I just sit in my office and practice aloud? Yeah, but as we both know, that never has the same impact. Right? It's like practicing your pitch aloud with nobody listening. It always goes fine. No pressure.
But we talk about this, Ryan. We talk about how on the other end, like knowing who you're talking to. So let's use the innovation adoption curve. So you got your innovators, your early adopters, and then let's just say your early majority. So what if I know someone and let's just say they're not the most early adoptery-ish type people that I know? Is there still a benefit going to talk to them? Should I categorize them, catalog them ahead of time? How do I approach that?
If you've got 5 other people on your list who are more like early adopters, talk to them first. If you don't, talk to this person first. Work your network first before we go off and start trying to do cold outreach and find people who fit our ICP. Right? I'm a huge ICP guy. Huge ideal client profile. I want you talking to the right people. I walk people through the early adopter curves that we find not just our ICP, but our early adopter ICP. Super important. But at these early days, to keep you from just sitting around and waiting until you found just the right person, just the right messaging, just the right timing, I want you to start. You have to start.
Got it. So you're saying that just go and start, and that information will be the feedback and help you even with your ICP or, these are the late majority type people. I'm not going to talk to them.
You have to validate all of it. I mean, again, I'm going to hold my book up again here. I hope that you've done the mom test, right? I hope that you've gone out and done customer interviews. I hope that the solution that you're proffering actually meets up with the real problems that they have. We'll talk about that a little more later again, but that's where that ICP definition and the early adopter definition, because that's where you're going to find out not only like who has this problem, but who's most willing to want to solve it right now. That's who we want to be talking to. But if those people don't exist within our network, it's okay. I'm still going to want you to start with your network before you're like, but I see this person. I know they're in my early adopter ICP. I just want to outreach to them. Okay, cool. You can do that too. I don't hear that often, right? I hear people saying, I just want to find, I just wish I had. Great. You know, if wishes were horses, then we'd sell more stuff to strangers, but they're not. So let's just make sure that we're focused in on the network that we've got.
Okay.
And move quick.
Okay. Now let's swing the pendulum to the other side. and I'll tell you a story. The most successful financial planner, and now he's a division manager. He's, some high up guy. The most successful one that I knew, he actually served me Vietnamese noodles, and he was just getting started. He was taking his licensing, and he literally, all he did was go, and he opened his phone book like when he got his license, and he just smiled and dialed and went down. And that's how he started his sales, by cold calling. And because he didn't have, people who fit. How much does cold calling make sense, or do we just completely avoid it at this time? What do you think?
Well, was that truly cold calling though? When you said his phone book or the phone book?
No, the phone book.
Okay.
Back when we had those.
That's really funny because that's actually how I got my third sale in web design development back in 1998, before I knew what I was doing. I just opened the phone book and I literally let it fall open.
See?
Okay. I just let it fall open. I was like, I'm just going to let fate decide this. It opened to DJ services companies. Imagine a population who might have less interest in the internet in 1998 than DJ service companies. We're talking like wedding DJs in most cases. 15 cold calls later, I had a meeting. 30, 40 phone calls later, I had my second meeting and I got my third sale. So yes, it does work, but let's take a variation of that first. So we all have our own personal phone book. Now, we may not have contacts who are at all relevant, but Kevin Bacon taught us something about how well connected we are to other people.
That
right?
Kevin Bacon, God bless him.
Only a few degrees of separation that exist. So if you don't have people who are specifically in your ICP, one of the things I will do is call people I know, starting with people who I know who are better networked, share with them what I'm working on, and ask them who they know that might fit these criteria. And I try to be really specific about that.
I like that. That's a nice interim solution. Here, then we move on, and you can dovetail all these together. Let's string them together. So then we have that conversation. Let's say by one reason or another, we get someone booked. What does that first sales call look like, especially if we're starting from scratch?
Sure. So there are a couple more things, like in terms of getting started, that I do want to talk through, like when we start selling.
Great.
And it's that we want to focus on conversations, not conversions.
Gotcha.
Right? We're not necessarily trying to close. Again, like, so if we go back to the example of just opening the phone book and talking to people we know to find out people they might know, we're not looking for a conversion there. We're looking for a conversation, right? So I think that's important. That should continue through. All right. Once we do start talking to the right people, we don't need to sell. We need to listen. We want to talk about their pains. What solutions have they already tried? That whole thing, when we go through the early adopter curve, I've covered that before. If we want to go over it again right now, we can. But we're not trying to persuade. We're trying to understand, right? We are, again, we're at founder-led sales. At some point, a professional salesperson will persuade someone. Why? Because they've already sold 1,000 people. And so they know how to do that, when and where to do that. We don't have that backing. We don't have that data. We don't have that experience. We don't have any of that. We don't have just the fact that a bunch of other people have bought it to know that will even work, right? So we want to be careful there. And then treat it like a test. Again, like you're not trying to close. We're trying to figure out if our solution truly does fit. If it does, then closing becomes a lot easier, right? So okay. So now, when we get into like the actual first call, start with a question, right? People are going to be so mad at me. They're going to be like, all Ryan does is ask questions. You never answer them. I do. But what's beautiful is if you can get your users to answer their own questions, and it turns out that you're just sitting in the room with them, and that the solutions become obvious, and you become the obvious solution, what better way to close, all right? So start with a real question. Avoid nothing worse than somebody starting with a generic pitch. Ed, I'm sure you get these all the time. Probably everybody in the audience is getting these as well. These cold pitches we get in LinkedIn. Are you looking for an offshore web development resource?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a question. Sorry, actually, that would at least be a question. In some cases, just like we offer, like how on earth are you determining whether I give half a shit about this, right? But you're throwing this in my face right at the beginning. So start with a question. What's the question? Tell me about the last time you experienced, insert big problem here, hopefully the one that came out of mom testing your customer interviews.
Okay, but let me back up because you demonstrate something really important. It has to be an open question.
Yes.
Not a closed question. Do you want IT services? Do you need them right now? Even if I need them, I'd probably say no, because I don't want to get into that conversation right there. And those are the worst questions to start off with.
And you know what's funny is that, like, at this point, having sat through enough of those conversations, like having said yes to enough bad salespeople, you start to understand something. People who ask bad questions up front offer bad solutions in the end. They do. I mean, like, I wish I could say it was different. I wish every once in a while I said, yeah, I'll take your silly cold pitch that makes no sense to me right now, sit through that and be like, man, this worked out so well. I never would have thought that we would end up in a business relationship together. It's never happened, right? Bad questions at the start, bad solutions at the end. So don't be that founder, all right? Start with that question, and to your point, I do keep it open-ended, because what we really want them to do is share their experience. The last thing that we want is them just reacting to our pitch, because then they're only reacting to what we put forth. Same thing I tell people, like, should I, if we're talking about learning from our users, should I run a survey? My answer is always no. And they're like, well, why no? It's so much more efficient than talking to people. And I say,
Totally.
okay, sure, very efficient, but you're only going to get answers to what you asked. You're going to miss out on so much more, and you're going to miss out on the nuance of those answers as well. So that's what we're looking for here, is make sure that we're asking these things in a way that leaves all the room possible for nuance, and let them share that experience, right? Which just feeds into kind of like the second thing I'm always trying to beat into founders' heads. Let them talk, right? Don't be me. Don't talk the entire time on this call, right? Like, shut up and listen. Seriously, the more they talk, the more valuable insights that you're going to get. If you're dominating the conversation, all you're doing is practicing your ability to talk. That's what riding in the car by yourself is for.
Yeah, they say that nobody cares how much you know until they know that you care, type thing.
About them, about
exactly.
them, right? Yeah. Ed, you just said we don't need to go take a Dale Carnegie course, and now you're quoting Dale Carnegie.
Oh, is that where that's from?
Pretty sure.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
And Ryan, just to clarify, this works pretty much for anything. Like, you could be doing CPG, you could be doing your app, SaaS, you name it.
Doesn't matter because at the end of the day, we're solving some form of problem for our clients, or we should be. If we're not, then we have a problem, all right? And so, but this is where this becomes really important. So this is where then we clarify that problem, right? So if they give us whatever that biggest problem was, then it is our job to clarify that as much as we possibly can, right? So we want to ask follow-up questions. We don't want to offer solutions yet. We'll get there. But it's things like, what's the impact of that for you, right? Is this costing you more time or more money, right? Ask follow-ups that help us to understand what the outcome of not solving this problem, right? Also ask them, how are they currently solving it? How are they currently solving it? This is super important. And I often see founders get really excited when they're like, and people are doing nothing about this. I'm the only solution that exists. And they get super excited. Don't get super excited about this. This is actually not a great thing, because it means you're fighting the status quo of inertia, of zero momentum. Right?
Yes.
I want people who are actively seeking solutions. I want people who are actively using a solution. And I want those people to still be upset with some part of that outcome. That upset is my little window to provide my differentiation and jump in and be the hero and win the day, right? So we want to continue to just drill down what's currently frustrating, right? So once they tell you what that is, so what's frustrating about that solution, right?
Yeah, I have advice for anybody watching. This is the technique that I use, just me, and I teach all my sales organizations. Write down these words. If you're listening to this, write these words down. What, when, how, who, okay? What, when, how, who. And I've learned that if I can get them to tell me what the problem is, when they have it, and describe the time, the experiences, how they think they got to the problem, or how the problem has continued to persist, and then who else the problem affects. Then I know a lot of things, like, oh yeah, like our whole team has been going through it, or my wife is really getting on me, my kids are being affected. Yep. And if I can find those 4 corner posts, I pretty much have covered the gamut. I don't ask, one technique I've learned is, why do you have that problem? That just puts
They
them
knew
on.
they probably wouldn't have it. But
Well,
by the
yeah.
way, Ed, where and why just called, and they're filing discrimination suit. So you know.
But back to the why, if I ask them, why do you have that problem? It's something that happens in the brain. They get defensive and they think they're getting interrogated. So I usually like to take them around and have those conversations, but you're bang on in terms of ask more questions, get them to talk.
Yep.
So now we're there, we got them to talk. So then what happens after that?
Now we should, if we've asked these questions correctly and we've listened well, all right? We've listened well. We weren't just focused on, okay, when they stop talking, I'll ask my next question. We've listened really well. We've synthesized the information they've given us about the problem, about, you know, what the impact is, how they're solving it, what is still frustrating about the current solution. This is where, again, this should identify that opportunity where our solution either fits or it doesn't. Okay? If it makes sense, this is the time where we position our solution. After we've understood their problem and all the complexities that come with it, right? The who, what, where, and how, we then can say, okay, look, based on what you've told me, here's what we'd do next, right? Here's how we'd solve for that, right? You can start to position your solution, and you position it against what they just gave you, right? So Ed, when we teach problem and solution on a pitch deck, one is just a reversal of the other. We start with the problem, we simply reverse it. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're going to take all that information that they just gave us, and we're going to reverse that into the solution. We're going to describe our solution by reversing the aspects of their problem we address. Of course, we don't say like, oh, yes, it'll, Ryan, your problem is that you're a 47-year-old trying to play soccer with 22-year-olds. We have a solution that will reverse age you to 22, right? If it doesn't do that, right? If it just, like, I thought you were a hydration drink. You're like, well, we are. Okay, cool. Then let's talk about how to be better hydrated. So make sure that you're positioning it with some reality. And then I like to just simply cut things relatively close there and end with a pretty simple next step. Right? I want to offer them, if we're doing trials, that's where we offer the trial. If, signing a contract is the next step, then that's what I'm going to say. Don't leave a lot of space here, because what I want to start to do now is to get to the point where we've created some friction. One of the mistakes I see here is that we end up like endlessly going on and talking about our solution, waiting for them to somehow like just magically throw money at us or hit us with a credit card or mail us a check. Does anybody do that anymore? So at this point, I don't want to belabor this too much. I want to quickly reverse the problem into our solution and then talk next step. And what makes sense as a next step will vary significantly, whether we're CPG, service, different types of organizations.
And that's what you're talking about is how do I close the deal without feeling pushy?
Perfect transition.
What you're saying, it's not closing the deal right there. Closing the deal really is next steps. That's what I heard.
Yeah, it's next steps, which could be a close. So I'm going to separate the two things of closing the deal now and closing the deal without feeling pushy, all right? Because this is just one of those things I constantly hear founders say. They're just like, I just feel pushy. I hate sales. I feel like I'm pushing, all right? My pushback to that is, all right, remind me, is the problem real? Yes. If they solve it, will they be better off? Yes. Is the way that you solve it comfortable and fair and equitable for your user? Yes. Then what are you being pushy about? It sounds like you're about to be really helpful for them and you're about to solve a real problem and make their lives better. Yes. Where's the pushy part exactly? Right, so it's not even necessarily just about the push to the close. It's about selling it all. This is one of the major pushbacks that I get around selling in general from founders is they just feel uncomfortable at this level. So closing isn't about being aggressive. It's about removing friction. Right, it's about removing analytical friction. It's about removing emotional friction, financial friction. All right, so at this point, if we've done what we were supposed to up until now, we should absolutely have a clear understanding of whether their problems and how they feel about their problems align up with how we reverse those problems into a solution. If that is true, then we are just now at the point of removing friction. If the problem is real and your solution fits, you don't have to push. If they aren't interested, one of two things is typically happening. They don't see the problem as urgent enough, okay? Now, that might not mean that it's not an urgent problem. It might mean that they have another one. The silly metaphor that I always use is if I walk into your house, Ed, with my pipe wrench, and I'm like, hey, Ed, I see you've got a leaky sink over there. Want me to take care of that? And you're like, why, yes, Ryan, I would like my leaky sink to be solved. However, the roof is currently on fire. So if you wouldn't mind stepping out of the doorway so the fire department can get in here and solve my first order problem, you and I can talk sometime next week after things have dried out, right? So sometimes it's not even that they don't see the problem as urgent enough. It's urgent on a relative scale. It may be something they absolutely want to solve, but there's something else that's in front of that, right? Walk up to me and go, hey, Ryan, tread on your tires is looking a little low. You might want to get that taken care of right now, and I happen to have a tire shop. You're like, yeah, the reason you're staring at my tires is that my car is stopped in front of your store because it's out of gas. That's my first order problem, right? So we've got to make sure that we get that context and we understand that.
And that's the reason, just to jump in, the reason I ask when. So if they tell me this pain happens every time I hit tax season, and I'm sitting right in the middle of summer, then I know the timing and I go, thank you very much, and then maybe my next steps is follow up at a specific time when I know they're going to be thinking about it. Here's the question. Let me derail you just for a second, because you brought up something really interesting. Sometimes, Ryan, it's founders are selling something or attempting to sell something that they truly believe that a user needs. And it could be true, but you're talking about, do they want it? Is it a compelling enough need to do it? Yeah. And so what if you're selling one of these things that is not one of those pressing, my roof is on fire, I'm out of gas moments, but it'd be a nice to have? How does that change this approach, if at all?
Ooh, well, it changes the approach in that we want to jump in our DeLorean, fire up the flux capacitor, go back in time, talk to our users before we build this solution, and make sure that we're building something that does solve a first order problem. Now, I'm not talking about like if we have intentionally built something that's just a nice to have, like don't do that. I'm saying we've built something that is absolute priority, because if your roof isn't on fire, a leaky sink is a first order problem, right? You're gonna have water all over the floor. That's a first order problem when the roof's not on fire. So I'm not talking about, oh, well, we built something it's a nice to have. If you built something that's a nice to have, rebuild. go back to the drawing board and keep working. Make sure that you're actually solving a truly pressing problem. If you're not, you will consistently fight, because then you're going to have to just randomly encounter people who have that problem and enough free resources, time, money, energy to solve nice to haves.
You bring up something I think that's so important. So I think the two potential scenarios are this. One, you might be talking to the wrong person who is never going to need it. So then you have feedback loop and you can adjust who you approach. But the reality might be you might find out that people don't really care as much about your solution or the problem as you think you did. And so I think that's the benefit, Ryan, of doing founder-led sales as well, because right away you can get that feedback. And like you say, you can go back and retool your startup, really, like from the studs.
Yep, you might have to, right? So the founder-led sales works best when it's a continuation of a customer interview process.
Nice.
Right? Founder-led sales should follow customer reviews. It should follow a product that was built around that specific problem for a specific archetype, specific avatar to begin with. If it's not, then unfortunately what ends up happening during the founder-led sales process is that we are conducting customer interviews, but with that price tag attached, and we take away some hard learnings a lot later than we could or should have. Right? It's still valuable information, but it's I talk about this a lot in my getting customer sessions on Mondays and Fridays, and that's this notion of my 4 Ps of product: proven proprietary process, right? This solves a real problem, right? So the proven proprietary process should be aligned with a real consumer problem because it helps us avoid P number 4, which is pivot, right? The last time you want to really be pivoting your product, now you might modify the approach, you're going to learn some stuff, yes, but if founder-led sales is the very first time you're hearing that you might not be the bee's knees for folks, that's a challenge, right? It shouldn't have come then. We should have known that before, and we should have modified the approach. So look, if we're at a point where we know the problem is real, okay, and we know that the solution fits, we had those conversations. I'm gonna say it again, you don't have to push here, right? And if it's not working, if they're not buying, it's one of two things, right? They don't see it as urgent enough, or it's not urgent enough right now, or you haven't explained your solution in a compelling enough way that makes them truly believe that you're a reversal of those problems in a way that they can tolerate. Make sense?
100% makes sense. And I think this is such an important conversation because, Ryan, this happens so much here at Startups.com. We see it where people build. They're building in a vacuum and they say, I need to make money. I'm running out. And then let's put it back.
Desperation is such a delicious perfume, right? Everybody loves to smell it.
And now let's just call it what it is. I was having a conversation yesterday with a founder, and there are different degrees of this. And they went out and they were trying to raise capital for their solution, and they were beating their heads against the wall because the sales were not happening. And they went and talked to someone who was in an investment firm, and they graciously spent some time and they said, the reality is you don't have $1 billion idea. Okay. Now that's what they needed to get that level of VC funding that they were asking for. But the reality hit them right in the face that they were not building something that solved a problem that was painful enough, that had enough demand to be a unicorn. Not saying everybody has to be that way, but take that to various degrees. And a lot of founders end up in that stark reality, and it sucks. Like, it's really hard to watch them, and it hurts.
It does. I'm laughing at it because I'm thinking about the fact that you said, the reality hits them in the face. Why is it information never lands in our hands or our laps as founders? It either punches us in the face or in the gut. Like, those are the only two places it ever lands for some reason.
Absolutely.
So, a couple more things here on the how to do this without feeling pushy piece, because I think this is important. Make the decision mutual, right? If this has been a conversation, and I've argued the entire time that it should be, this has been a conversation, we should have enough information now to be able to ask a question, something along the lines of, and this isn't wordsmith, but do you feel like this would solve your problem? Right?
Nice. Okay.
You can even say, like, look, I see how this works. Like, I can see a better future for you on the other side of using this. Do you see this the same way that I do? Right? Force them to join you in that moment and either agree that they see it the same way you do or that they don't. This doesn't mean that there won't be other pushback later. But Ed, I'm sure you've discovered this as well. But to me, sales is a series of small wins.
Sure. 100%.
That turn into a purchase, right? It's not a fight and then throw the right hook and then we win. It's a series of micro adjustments in the mentality of the user, the buyer, that says, I was doing this or I was doing nothing, and slowly I'm starting to decide to make a shift in that behavior and eventually use you. Okay, that's selling. All right, so try to make that a mutual decision. And then again, like offer an easy first step, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but do something where like, okay, I've always loved I use this a lot as the buyer, as somebody in marketing, you get hit up with solution after solution after solution, tool after tool after service after data source. And they always come at me with like a big price tag. And I'm always like, okay, cool. What's the least that I can spend to validate that your solution actually works for me? Right?
Good question.
When I'm selling, I will often just reverse that, right? What's something small that we could start with tomorrow or next week or whatever an appropriate time frame is so that we can get started? Let's start with a small test. It could be a time limited thing, right? Let's just try this for 2 weeks. Let's do this for a month. Let's try this on your next project. Let's try this with your next 2 hires. Whatever your solution feeds into, get a way to shrink that down to a bite size so that people can feel better about doing this. Sometimes one of the big hurdles always is adoption. Right? If we say yes to something, yes, we are saying no to our problems in the long term. Typically, we're saying yes to some level of homework or effort on our part to get there. Right? Very few things that you buy that just show up and like do their magic, right? Other than electricity, which I still don't believe is real.
There's a risk as well, like especially
100%.
if you're doing something like B2B enterprise type sales. I have founders and they say, I can't convince this company to do a pilot for their entire accounting division using my new software that just got born last week.
Because if that goes great, then they might get a little pat on the back. Maybe any recognition, maybe. Sometimes not even, right? If it goes well. If it goes poorly, they learn that lesson the same way we do. It's the hit to the gut or the punch to the face, right?
That's the risk. So, but if you know who you're talking to and you know what's in it for them, you know the conditions that brought them there, I'll give just a small pro tip for people who are watching. What I like to do after I've done everything that Ryan has said, I will say, I'd like to take a moment just to summarize what I heard in this conversation. And I will go through, I like to use these little constructs in my head. I like to go through see, hear, understand, care. So these are things I see. Here's what I heard. Here's what I understand. Here's what I see you care about and share that I care about it as well. And then I say, how'd I do? And they'll tell me, no, you missed this, or, oh, you did really good. And that just sends the signal that we're on the same page. And they're like, wow, Ed really listened. This is that whole active listening you talked about. And then I'll ask permission. I say, so how would it be if I just suggested something that I think we could possibly do moving forward? Or I'd like to suggest the next step, if that's okay with you, if you're comfortable. And then I will propose, and like your little thing, it's called de-risking when it comes to investment, or risk reversal. Like, how about we just start you with a trial, or how about I just start with this intake process and you see, or we do rolling contracts, whatever it is. And then I will ask their feedback and I'll say, what do you think? How would that work for you? And then the conversation continues, and they literally process what it would look like to take those next steps with me. As you said, it's that co-construction. We're working together. That's how I do it.
Yep. No, it works. Again, when we keep asking questions, and I'm sure you've heard this one before too, but ask a couple of questions where you feel like you're likely to get a yes. When you start getting people to say yes, they're more likely to keep saying yes. We get people saying no, they're likely to keep saying no. And look, if they do hesitate at the end, if we do offer that bite-sized solution, even if it's one they've offered up, right? They're like, okay, how can we make this really small? I don't want to do this for your entire accounting department because I understand the risk in that. How do we do this for your 5 junior accountants? Or where's a place where we could crystallize this that would show the biggest win for you? And they give you that. And then they still hesitate. We got to understand why they're hesitating. And in my experience, hesitation typically comes from either just the fear of change from all the stuff that we just talked about. Could be the risk for them, could be, could this displace my job? Like there's a lot of people right now who are being offered AI solutions who are afraid to buy them because they're afraid it means the end of their job. Tough sell. You're like, I've got something that will render you irrelevant. Where do I sign up? Right? So what is the fear around that uncertainty? Or it's uncertainty about the ROI. They believe that even if we succeed, that there isn't going to be enough lift or enough return on their investment of time, reputation,
it's a real thing,
money, whatever it is. So address that concern, not just the objection. We talk about objection handling a lot, but I think that so very frequently we forget to look at what's the concern that lives behind the objection. Right? If they say, my objection is, this feels a little pricey, right? The concern might be, I've pushed 3 solutions up to the executive team in the last 3 months. We've spent money on all of them and none of them are generating ROI.
Yes, and that's perfect. This is the segue, and we can wrap it all together in terms of, okay, you might be dealing with rejection. It might not be you, could be you. Yeah. How do you deal with rejection? When do you know to cut bait, Ryan? It's like, and when do you know to say, all right, I'm going to, take these lessons, I'm going to adjust it, but not feel bad like, oh, I'm such a loser?
Oh man, the timing on this is great because I did a one-on-one earlier this week with a founder who was dealing with exactly some of this stuff, and we had a really great conversation. I'll try to summarize towards the end here around the right no, the wrong no, the right yes, the wrong yes, and how to handle the rejection and really like what is a no? When is a no a no? When is a no not a no? Like all that stuff, right? So look, rejection is not failure, right? It's feedback. It's feedback. It's great feedback, right? When we get all the way through this and we've been able to manage up to the point where we're at the finish line and now we get rejection, this is fantastic feedback, right? It's feedback that somewhere in that path, something, despite looking like it worked and keeping us moving forward, didn't get us to the point we want, right? Sometimes these are easy to spot, sometimes they're not. If you've got a 15-minute sales pitch and sales cycle where you're selling something relatively low drag at a low price, that people can just kind of buy, like consumer products, something like that. If you are selling an enterprise SaaS solution, you might have sales cycles that are in the months. I talked to somebody a few weeks ago, and they told me their sales cycle was 14 months.
For what?
I felt punched in the face on their behalf. Big enterprise solution. They're largely selling into governments, airlines, and a couple other like really big, highly regulated industries, which mean that the decision makers don't even necessarily live within their organization. Sometimes they're looking for third-party exterior approval. It was a mess. They weren't wrong. Like when we dug into it, I was like, are you sure? And then we looked at it, I was like, okay, actually that makes sense and I can see how that would be. So look, don't take this stuff personally. I think this is where like we have to talk out of both sides of our mouths a little bit. In the first segment of this we did a couple weeks ago, we talked about the fact that like because you're the founder, because you're the closest to the problem, you have all this superpower around understanding it better than anybody else. You sort of are still the product at that point, or you have all the control over the product. You can't treat it like it is you. When the feedback is negative or there's rejection, you can't take this stuff personally. You're gonna burn out in like 8 or 9 calls. You're just going to weaken yourself with every call. If instead you treat it as feedback and learning, you're going to get stronger with every call, right? So you get to choose here, which is great. Just reframe it to begin with. Instead of thinking like, I lost the sale, ask yourself first, what did I learn? Even if you get the sale, first question in your head as a founder leading sales should be, what did I learn? What did I learn? Whether it was good, bad, or neutral, what did I learn from today's call or today's calls or this 14 months worth of calls? All right, what did I learn? No sometimes means not right now. I would say like often 80% of the time, and again, this is when we get to this point in the call, right? If we've gotten this far and we do see that we're a good fit, that they had the right kind of problems, that they feel the right way about the problems, that they feel the right way around wanting to solve them, and we believe our solution matches up, sometimes it's just a matter of not right now. Right? Go back to my silly example, right? Ed, your roof's on fire and I've got a pipe wrench, right? Yes, but not today, right?
And to get more brutal about it, for good, it could be it's a no, but you might have learned something that would have made them say yes.
Of course.
And that, if you don't take that as rejection, you process it properly, that becomes feedback.
Yeah. By the way, and we'll talk about this in a second, you can go back to them and say that thing. Some people's like, I wish I had said. I was like, did they die right after the call? No, then you can still talk to them. Great news. So look, 80% of sales, I think that's the figure. It's out there somewhere, but 80% of sales happen after the first closing conversation, not the first conversation. Of course, a lot of them happen after that, but 80% of sales, something like that, happen after the initial attempt to close. Meaning, if you are not following up, if you are not staying in touch, if you're not continuing to try to add value, if you're not checking in later, you are going to lose 80% of your sales. So if you're sitting out there right now going, oh, my close rate's terrible, ask yourself if you gave up too soon. Chances are, if you are not relentlessly following up, if you're not systematically following up, diligently following up and being helpful, you are leaving a ton of sales dollars on the table.
Okay, but hang on. This possibly opens a can of worms because we talked about, listen, don't over-engineer and don't spend too much time, get out there. So we're starting from scratch. So what's the most simplest follow-up system that you would recommend? We're starting from scratch. Remember, after that call, is it just a spreadsheet, put something in your calendar? How do we do this, Ryan?
Yeah, notebook. It doesn't, simplest is whatever will work to remind you to speak to that individual at some interval. Let's be honest though, there are plenty of free CRMs out there. There's Google Sheets, there's Airtable. You are not at a loss for a method for doing this or a tool to help you with this. It doesn't need to be super manual. It also doesn't need to be super sophisticated, right? You don't need Pipedrive linked to Salesforce, linked to a data enrichment tool and Scrap, and then, you don't need all that. What you do need are a couple things. You need to be paying attention to what's going on in the world of your clients. Sometimes something happens that all of a sudden makes you relevant to a whole bunch of people that you weren't relevant to again. Great time to reach out, right? To your point, periodicity matters, right? If you're talking to me in June, trying to sell me, I don't know, ice skate cleanser. I mean, maybe that works in Canada. Like, you're like, we skate year round, right?
Yeah, we love that stuff up here.
Yeah. So I don't even know if that's a thing. Is there such a thing as ice skate cleanser? There must be, right? So it might not be the right time, right? For me, definitely not the right time. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that periodicity and reaching back out. Ask the questions about it. Sometimes they'll tell us when they'll be relevant again. I had somebody ask me a few weeks ago, and I was very honest about it. They wanted to know, hey, are you interested in making a switch like this? And I was like, it is actually on my mind. They're like, great, let's talk next week. I said, but I'm in contract with our current provider until November of next year. So a very relevant time for this conversation will be September. And so we schedule, I have a call on my calendar already for September. That's how busy I get, right? Because that's the period that was going to matter for me.
Okay, we're running out of time here. I wanted to ask you this one last thing. In 1 minute, this is everything that we covered. So we got founders going to be watching this for the first time.
Sure.
What's the one action item that they need to do right after watching this?
It's going to depend a little bit on what they've already done. If you're already selling, then take into account some of the stuff we talked. Take a look at your call, and let's assume that they're not selling. Let's do that
from scratch.
Let's assume we're starting from scratch. Open up that Rolodex, that phone list, your email, your LinkedIn, and pull out at least 200 contacts. Make that list that I told you to make. Tell me why you wouldn't talk to those people anyways. Even though they are the 200 you picked, tell me why you wouldn't talk to them. You're going to start to see that a lot of the reasoning that you put behind why you wouldn't talk to those folks is going to be some version of fear-based. It's fear of rejection. It's fear that they won't like my solution. It's fear that, I used to know them in this context and now I know them in that context. Or a fear that they're not going to want to hear from me. Hey, they don't have to talk to you. You can still reach out. I guarantee they won't talk to you if you don't reach out, right? So if I was going to have anybody do one thing today to get started with founder-led sales, it would be to make that list. Because without that, doesn't matter the process that we have, the approach that we choose, how knowledgeable you just became having listened to what we've talked about today, you're not going to move forward with founder-led sales.
I love that, Ryan, because in executive coaching, we believe that the one emotion that can change everything is courage. So if you have the courage to make that list, face your fears, make those phone calls, everything else will fall into place. This has been great, Ryan. This is only the tip of the iceberg, everyone. We are going to continue creating this series for everyone. This hopefully gets you started. And as always, Ryan is available Mondays and Fridays, Getting Customers Workshop. He works everybody through this. We're available. We're different cohorts. We got the Revenue Accelerator. We're helping all of you. And if you're not part of Startups.com, just take it all in and get out there and go be successful and let us hear about it in the future. Ryan, this has been fantastic. We're going to continue next Wednesday, so invite everybody back. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
All right, gang. See you next Wednesday.